welcome to Local Theologians, a podcast from Midwestern Seminary's global campus. I'm your host, Travis Montgomery. I want to begin our time here with Dr. Ronni Kurtz. Ronni is a professor of systematic theology, assistant professor of systematic theology here at Midwestern Seminary. I've known Dr. Kurtz for several years now, and I've enjoyed getting to know him and hanging out with him through the years, even though we are on very, very far sides of this campus. So it's not a really big place, and yet we're estranged in that way. And even tonight, connecting here virtually. But Ronni, thanks so much for being a part of this.
Man, it's my joy. I appreciate you, and so thankful for the global campus community. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, brother. It's a sweet time, and some of our students will know that you've already invested lots of time and energy into this through developing courses in systematic theology, kind of overviews, teaching some of those courses at times. And so they may not even know, even if they have taken one of those classes, just the kind of work that goes into that. And so just as someone who does know and has seen all that, I want to personally thank you on the behalf of these students. And I'm excited for them to get to know you and those who haven't taken classes with you a little bit more than just what they've gotten in a lecture and a discussion. Hear a little bit more what drives you and makes you tick, because it is very much the kind of thing that we're trying to cultivate and instill, and the kind of thing that draws people to our school. And so excited to have this conversation, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am obviously here to talk about theology with you. You know, we record this and send it out as a show that we call Local Theologians, as you know. And we're a little ways into doing that and have yet to even explain why that name and what that means. And so, as you know, we're going to talk a little bit about that very idea tonight. But of course, more broadly, why study systematic theology? What place does that have for those of us who hold the Bible really, really highly, actually supremely? And what good is it to read all these other books? And of course, you and I and anybody watching this already has a good library and knows that those things matter. But sometimes I find that it's hard to articulate the why behind that. And so I'm excited to do that. So this first question that I've got for you is everyone a theologian? Okay, give me your very quick hot take answer, and then we can kind of elaborate, because I know there's nuances and caveats, but pretend those don't exist for a second. Ronni, is everyone a theologian?
All right, you can tell we're on different sides of the campus, because the one thing you should know about me already, Travis, is I don't do hot takes, man.
Give us your lukewarmest take.
I do cold takes like 6 months after the fact. So
I like that. Well, you can come back on later, but yes or no,
right,
is everyone a theologian, Ronni?
Yeah, I think there is a yes and no here. Let me speak to the yes. Sorry, I knew you said throw nuance away, and here I am.
That's right. I mean, this is what we want. We want to unravel the yes and the no.
Right.
So
yeah, there's a yes and a no. The yes is based in how you define that word, theology. And there's, it's not an overly brilliant word. It's the combination of two words, theos, logos. And when you throw those words together and literally just kind of a word for word translation, that would mean something like studying God, thoughts about God, words about God, speech about God. And the reality is, if that's what theology is, having thoughts about God, having intuition about God, having words about God, then yes, everyone is a theologian, if that's how we define it. The reality is, even atheists who say there is no God, that is a theology. It's just an incorrect one. And so it is impossible to not partake in the activity that is theology. Now, we can get a little more nuanced than that. I think words about God or thoughts about God is a fine definition. I've been very influenced by the late theologian John Webster, who passed in 2016, and he, pulling on a long history of Christian thinkers, defines theology as the study of God and all things in relation to God. I think that's a really good definition, because it first and foremost reminds us that theology has two subjects. The primary subject of theology is God himself. That is what we are after. And the second subject of theology is everything else. There's a reason us theologians can be annoying when we think we can talk about anything. And it's because we believe that theology is a study of God and then everything else in relation to God. And so that's a little more formal definition. So the way that we could say it's a no is there is a sense in which everyone participates in theology, and yet not everyone is a vocational theologian. There really is, and we've experienced this. I mean, if you jump on Facebook and hop into like any comment section that has to do with spiritual stuff, you're like, I think I could technically call what's happening there theology, but I'm not
Mm.
sure I want to use that word
Yeah.
for what's going on there.
Yeah.
And so there is a sense in which we do want to keep, expertise involved. It's a similar with like the word missionary. There's like this movement where like everybody's a missionary, and it's like, well, if everyone's a missionary, then no one's really a missionary. And I kind of feel that a little bit of like, well, if everyone's a theologian, then no one's a theologian. And there is a real thing as expertise, but I do also want to protect the idea that yes, in a sense, every single person who's ever lived has thoughts, intuitions, words, and inclinations about God, and therefore is practicing theology. So real quick, the question I like to remind my students is, if that's true, if you cannot not practice theology, the question is not, will you be a theologian? The question is, will you be a faithful one?
Mhm.
And that's going to put a little more weight on, the shoulders of us Christians who want to worship the Lord well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we both say there's a little analogy here when we think of like the word ministry of the church. I think of Ephesians 4, I think of the offices there and the shepherd teachers who are equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. But what is it that they do? They speak the truth in love, building each other up in sound
Yes.
doctrine. And so, some have called that like a special ministry of the word and a general ministry of the word. And if I agree, if that's what we're talking about, then of course we all have that general ministry. And yet there's a special ministry, there's an office there. And of course, where vocational professional theologian fits in Ephesians 4, I think that'd be a fun conversation to have sometime. Are they
Yeah,
the teachers?
that's right. Yeah.
But nevertheless, I mean, I think that's hopefully encouraging everyone who's listening. I think there are probably some categories of people listening, people who are thinking, I know I am not a vocational theologian or called to be one. Others who say I might aspire to do that. And I want to get to that eventually, but I think more than kind of thinking about that abstractly, I think it's helpful to think about that personally. So,
Mm.
I've
Yeah.
asked you to think about your own story and share that, because I just find that I heard this recently from a guy actually who produces sitcoms, Phil Rosenthal, if anyone's keeping track, that the more specific you get with people, and in his case, like characters and stories, he said, I've found that being more generic actually connects to fewer people, that getting
Mm.
more specific connects more to people, even if they don't share that very specific thing, that they can relate better actually to your experience related to some experience they have. So I think it's going to be helpful for people to hear, even though they may not be Ronni and their story may not be your story. I think it's going to be helpful for them to hear kind of how that played out for you. So how did you come to study first theology in a formal way? And then how have you come to practice it vocationally?
Yeah, love this question. Happy to get a little personal here. It's going to sound like I'm starting too far back, but follow me.
You were
Um,
born.
that's right. One
You were
day I was
elected.
born. That's right.
Yeah.
We're going way back. Yeah. No. I did not grow up in a Christian household. As far as I know, I'm the first Christian in my immediate family, and the Lord used some really interesting circumstances to kind of get me into the faith. And the first Bible story I ever heard was God's requesting of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, which is a really interesting first Bible story to hear, especially when you're already convinced Christians are weird. Like, oh,
Yeah.
it's actually weirder than I thought it was.
Yeah.
But whenever I was converted, it was later on, kind of in high school, middle to late high school. I was mentored by just a really faithful youth pastor. And I learned early. It's funny because I often, now doing what I do, I get this question where people will ask, how do you make sure that when you study God, you're not merely studying for the intellect, but you're flaming up your devotion and affection for Him? And I am just a bad person to ask that to. And the reason is that's never been a thing for me. In fact, as early as I can remember in the Christian faith, my intellect and my affections have been real close. And the more I see the Lord, the bigger view I have of Him, the more my affections are just on fire. And so I found that to be true early in my walk with Jesus, that the more I read the scriptures, the more I contemplated who he was and what he's doing in the world, the more I just loved him. So the more I saw, the more I loved. And in that way, I wouldn't have had these categories as a new believer, but I was actually developing an appetite for holy curiosity and developing an appetite for the kind of soul that's bent towards theological contemplation. And so I wouldn't have known that then, but that's what was happening. I was extremely curious and just couldn't get away from the Bible. I just wanted to read it. And I was asking questions. I was writing questions down and asking anyone who would give me the time of day. And so in that process, just learned that I wanted more formal discipleship. And at that point, the only ministry I ever saw was a youth pastor. So I thought maybe youth ministry is what I'm going to do. So I went to the local Bible college in southern Missouri, and went to a university in southern Missouri there and fell in love with, I was doing a degree in biblical studies. And when I got into the program, I felt a little uncomfortable because here I am now as a freshman in university setting where a lot of these other students have been Christians their whole lives. They know all the Bible stories very well. And I'm like 18 months at most into following Jesus, and haven't finished the Bible cover to cover yet. Like, I'm still really trying to get my sea legs following Christ. But even with that, I recognized early in my university life, doing a degree in biblical studies, assuming I'll be a youth pastor, that same thread was there. The more I learned, the more I loved.
Mhm.
And it just became a kind of thing. By the end of my senior year, I thought, I'm not done. Like, there's more for me here. I want to continue pressing in. So I went to seminary, went to Midwestern Seminary. I'm a 3-time graduate of Midwestern Seminary, so very much love this place. And in my graduate degree, there was the question of my seminary experience was, am I going to be full-time? Am I going to be a pastor, or am I going to be a professor? Because by that point in my life, I had developed a real love of both. And I tell people all the time, I live a hybrid life. And there are some days I wake up and the strongest desire of my soul is to pastor a church. And there are some times when I wake up and the strongest desire of my soul is to be a professor. And luckily, I have found an intellectual community where that kind of a hybrid is not pitted against one another, but
Yeah.
even encouraged and being
Right.
for the church. And so for me, the MDiv was a long 3-year exercise of saying, all right, Ronnie, which one's it going to be? Is it going to be ministry in the local church, or is it going to be ministry in the academy? And I just resolved, as you know, Travis, as long as the Lord will let me, I'm going to keep them together.
Mhm.
And so I figured, I'll just continue in school and continue learning about the Lord, continue pressing into the intellectual life so that my devotional life could be fueled. And, even if I, am a pastor, a PhD is not going to hurt me. And so I continued pressing in, and was solidified through that formal academic study as something I really love, and still would like to be a local church pastor. And so that's kind of the dream for me, would be stay in the academy doing theology professionally, and yet bending my academic life towards the local church while pastoring a local church one day.
Yeah, praise the Lord, man. Well, it's cool to hear, even just knowing a few more of the steps in some of that story, and some of the time you have spent in the local church pastoring in the past, and having been able to watch some of that. It's encouraging to hear you say it, knowing that wasn't just like that would be fun thing to do, but through ups and downs, even you've been able to pursue that. And I think we could swap stories about that. So as people listen to this, they think, maybe that's for me. I'm not sure, but I just definitely know that I like learning this. This is something that I think is helpful. Some watching or listening, maybe they've been pastors for many, many years. Maybe they're actively pursuing that kind of professorial life, or maybe they just really don't know. They just want to be faithful church members, and they think, well, a master's degree is not going to hurt or whatever. Um, what is the role broadly then? Okay, with zooming back out, theological reflection in the Christian life for faithfulness. Talked about intellect and affections. You talked about the inescapability of having some kind of thoughts about God. But if you were to refine that and say, okay, for every one of us, not just speaking the truth and love to each other, although I think that's part of your answer, but just theological reflection for oneself, mulling these sorts of things over, reading about these sorts of things. Before I land the plane with a question mark, I think about that quote from C.S. Lewis about how, a pen in hand working through, he says, a bit of tough theology, I think is the
Yeah,
way he
that's
puts
right.
it,
Yeah.
has stirred his soul a lot more than reading some more kind of contemplative sort of works have been. Uh, what do you think is the most concise way to put that, or what is one concise way to put that? The role of theological reflection in the Christian life in general.
Yeah, love this, man. Um, in my classrooms, I use a phrase that is not original to me. It's original from a theologian named Kevin Van Hooser, but I use this phrase called "administer of reality." And this phrase has come to mean a lot to me. And it was a passing comment. I remember I was kind of in my MDiv at Midwestern, and Kevin Van Hooser was speaking at an event, and it wasn't even the point of his talk. And he made a passing comment about this phrase, "administer of reality." And I have no clue what the talk was about. Sorry if you see this, Dr. Van Hooser, but that phrase stuck into my mind, and I've not been able to shake it since that night. And this idea of like, man, I probably don't have to convince anybody on this call that we live in a world of lies. And the speed at which lies are coming to us these days is so rapid that one of the things the world needs is not necessarily more brilliant people. What the world needs is more people who have spent time beholding the glory of the Lord, who are conformed to the image of the Son, as
Mm.
2 Corinthians 3:18 says, who, when the world is bombarding us with so much noise and loudness, we can hear the lies and in the place of lies administer that which is real. And I think where theological reflection really meets the road, practical day-to-day Christian life, is in the way, can you imagine what is real when so much around you is fake? And this notion of like a depth of soul has meant a lot to me over the last couple of years, and along with it, this notion of like a theological imagination. A lot of people would hear theological imagination as like well, I don't think we want that. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Right.
create new theology, right? In a
Yeah.
2,000-year-old faith, new theology is not good. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about with developing a deep soul and a theological imagination is in the midst of sorrow, when everything around you is falling apart and it feels like the world is just crumbling underneath of you. Can you, even in those moments of turmoil and terror, can you imagine what is real? Can you find a place where James 1 makes sense when everything else is falling apart? Um, that's the kind of theological imagination the world needs, where we can imagine, even when it doesn't feel real, we can imagine what is actually real, so that I know this rhythm that I'm living that feels maybe mundane or maybe even boring, where I wake up and I do some work and I go to sleep and I wake up and I do some work and I go to sleep, and I'm tempted to feel like, does any of this matter? Like,
Hmm.
am I just like on a hamster wheel here? I have the ability, the depth of soul, the theological imagination to know, no, 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 this is not meaningless. I am on a pilgrimage towards the celestial city. And every day is one step closer to when my faith will become sight. And none of this, nobody I interact with is meaningless because I know what is real. And that might feel abstract, but what's happening there is actually a lot of theology. It is knowing who God made people to be, what God made this world to be, who we're supposed to be in the church, who we're supposed to be in the city of God and the city of man. That's all theological reflection. And we don't want to idolize theological reflection, but in so much as theology can give us God, can help us administer what is real, it is a tremendous gift from the Lord.
Hmm. Man. Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of opponents to seeing things as they really are, right? One is just mundanity, things just going through life on the hamster wheel. You mentioned broadly like cultural kind of implied like distortion of what's real and kind of misrepresentations of God and his world. And I think we'd add suffering to that list too. And I think always of Second Corinthians 4 and 5, but especially chapter 4, where he's talking about the weight of glory that, we shouldn't even compare these afflictions. And then he says, because we look to the unseen things which are eternal, not these visible things that are transient. And, you could distort and twist that and become a Christian Scientist Gnostic who
Of
thinks the
course, yeah.
material world's not real. But I think when you say what's real, reality, most of us, or at least oftentimes, we go immediately to things that we can sense. And it's so important. Remember, that's not a biblical view. That's not a theological view. God is the most real, and he's the invisible God.
That's exactly
Right.
right.
And so to look past what we see is, one, to look with faith. But two, it's to think on God himself, right? And so the role of imagination there, I mean, I find that incredibly helpful. You even allude there to Pilgrim's Progress, to the celestial city, and I'm sure we could have a whole side conversation about the role of like fiction and stories in this.
Hey,
I think
amen.
that's just right there next to good theology. I think in some ways, just the ability to train us to think beyond what we're experiencing in this moment, to better
Yes.
correct what we see in this moment too, right? Not to escape it, but to see it for what it really is.
Yes, that's
And
exactly
that's
right,
hard to
Travis.
do. And we don't do that unless we see God in it, right? So obviously, that's important for us. If it's important for us, it's going to be important for everybody that we're trying to minister to, everybody we care about. I've already mentioned, the sorts of vocations of people who might be watching or listening, who are pastors, homemakers, ministers, disciple makers of whatever sort, right? And the question, I think, for us is, okay, to be those administrators of reality to others, we've already basically said, well, you need to have done theological reflection. Some formal theological study is going to help you do that. But when it comes to the actual handoff, okay, maybe I've dug this deep well of theological reflection for myself. How do I get that to other people? If the question is, how can I be a good discipler? How can I be a good, in the term I want to use is local theologian? And so
Yeah.
if I'm going to ask you, and I want to hear your answer to this, how can we just as ordinary disciple makers be good local theologians? But I want to take point of privilege and explain kind of why that term
Yeah, please
and
do.
why that came to mind. And I think you're going to resonate with this, which is part of why I've included it in this particular conversation, is because, we hear about public theologians, and you mentioned Kevin Van Hooser, and he's written a book, along those lines too. And I think it's helpful. And this is a time and an age in which it's very easy to try your hand at that vocation. You can just get on the internet and try to do that. And we think public, we mean like kind of all the people who sort of share whatever marketplace with us, whether that's some niche online community, or it's our actual like towns and communities, or it's our nation, or whatever it may be. And we're assuming there that there's a mix of believers and unbelievers there, and we're trying to administer reality, and that's great. I think some people do a really good job of doing that kind of work. But you and I both know that you can build a platform of public theology, but the people who know you well, with whom you actually are going to worship or bump into at the store or whatever, you might not be living what you preach. You could be a hypocrite, but you could also just not care to administer reality to that person, right? It could be maybe beneath you. I'm sure we could also multiply examples of people who do that really well. They have some kind of public platform, whatever it may be, and they are just every bit who they pretend to be, and even better. But when I think about a local theologian, I think they're about, more specifically, that person, whether they're called to vocational theology or not, whether that's academic or ecclesial or public, that they take the time, that they're intentional about administering reality to their families, to their friends, to the people in their workplace, wherever that may be, not just when they're paid to be doing it, not just when someone has asked them to do it, but as they have opportunity, they're trying to be bearers of that good news. And so, having explained that a little bit,
Yeah.
how can we do that well? I'm thinking especially of those who don't have a vocation in systematic theology. What can we do to hand that off really well to people?
Travis, I love this question so much, man.
I hoped you would.
It's one of the reasons I appreciate you, and the fact that you're leading the global campus right now. It's just, you're just the right person for it, and this question shows why. So,
Thanks, brother.
can I start by giving an example from fiction? I mean, you kind of
Yeah.
teed me up a little bit.
Do it.
Okay, so if you don't know, viewers, I love fiction. If I hadn't done theology vocational, I probably would have been an English professor or something, or at least tried to be. But my favorite book of all time is The Brothers Karamazov from Fyodor Dostoevsky, who J.I. Packer called the greatest Christian writer to ever live outside of the Bible. And in The Brothers Karamazov, it's about these brothers. And there's this one scene I want to bring up for this exact question. There's these three brothers, and the three brothers kind of represent different worldviews. And the youngest brother, Alyosha, or sometimes he's called Alexei, is kind of the religious brother of the three. And the middle brother, Ivan Karamazov, is the intellectual. He's kind of an atheist, or not a kind of, he is very much an atheist. And there's this one scene where Ivan, the middle brother, is about to depart for a long time, and his younger brother and him don't know if they're going to see each other for a while. And so they're in a cafe. So I'm trying to paint the picture here. They're in a cafe, and the younger brother basically just puts the cards on the table and is like, "Why don't you believe?" And the middle brother, Ivan, his response is so spectacular. It ends up leading to a very famous, maybe the most famous scene in fiction called the Grand Inquisitor. However, before you get to the Grand Inquisitor scene, Ivan says, "One of the things I hate about Christianity is the fact that it calls me to love my neighbor." And he says, "I have no problem loving the idea of mankind. But when you put flesh on it, and you don't call me just to love men in general, but that man right there, when you don't call me to love people, but my actual neighbor, the nearness of my neighbor makes them insufferable." And I think this is where local theology comes in, because it is one thing to administer reality to a vague social media platform. It is a whole other thing to administer reality to a mother who just had a stillborn. One of them feels like you might be doing ministry. One is real ministry. And it's one of the reasons I deeply love the Lord's Supper, because when my local church, the nearest neighbors I have, people who have covenanted to me and I have covenanted to them, the kind of people for which I would say, when I hear the question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" I would say, "Yes, I am," emphatically. They are my keeper and I am theirs. When they come forward every Sunday, where at my church, we take the Lord's Supper every Sunday, and when they come forward, it's like a parade of the nearest neighbors I have. And I can't just love the idea of people. I have to love those ones
Yeah.
with all of their ridiculousness intact. Some of them, very easy for me to love. Some of them, it's by the grace of God.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't get this this buffer, this non-incarnational distance where I can love the idea of them. I have to love those church members. And the localness of that is where real theology happens. In fact, I think we're even seeing it. I just came from teaching at an undergraduate university before I came to Midwestern, and more I'm seeing Gen Z, Gen Alpha just kind of tired of social media. And we often pit them as they live on TikTok and that's all. And maybe that's true for a lot of them. But I had so many meetings with students who were just kind of exhausted of the whole thing, because it's not real and they can feel it. And I think there's a little bit of even the online celebrity, pastor, the famous pastor online, that's kind of dying. And I'm grateful for it.
Yep.
Again, one of my heroes is John Webster. He wrote a book called The Culture of Theology. And one of the things he laments in that book is the dislocation of theology from its local contexts. He says theology must be localized. And I think that's right. Because if theology is meant for the administration of reality, for God's glory, for our joy, for the good of our neighbor, it can't have those kinds of application points if it's just to a general vague audience out there somewhere. So yeah, you got me on a topic that I care a lot about. And so the localness is so needed and necessary.
I love it, man. Yeah. And I knew you'd appreciate it, because I think that I hear you talk about these sorts of things. I know you embody this as well. And I want to speak a little bit to the term, because as we were thinking about even what to name some of this that we're trying to do and what we're hoping to cultivate at our global campus, right? It's a global campus because anybody can get a degree through this institution wherever they are, but they are somewhere, and that's so important to it. And so the disconnection that can happen. It's ironic because we're more connected than we would be otherwise, but the sense of disconnect we can feel is supposed to just be fueling people up, training people to be really, really well equipped for the people they are most closely connected with, right? But as we're looking this up, there is actually a little movement. There are a couple of books using the terms local theology, and sometimes they mean like hyper contextualized theology in a way that neither of us would really be comfortable with. And so the way I've been thinking about it, one way I like to put it is, it's not, local theology is not, well, you shall only steal under certain circumstances. It's not, for you, let's change what's true. Let's administer kind of a quasi reality. It's Bob shall not steal, right?
Yes,
The
amen.
substance of the message is the same, and it's something that is broadly applicable. It's from the word, it's from the Spirit, and it's put in lots of idioms and languages. But the local element isn't because we're changing it and kind of branding it differently wherever we go. It's because we are applying it like doctors, right? So like, penicillin, you don't alter the chemical makeup of penicillin to make it more effective for this person or that person, but you do have to actually like administer it to that person, right?
Yes.
That's the local part that we're going for. It makes me think a little bit of the way Lewis talks about love and his four loves. He says something really similar and to brothers Karamazov, and he says, most of us, the ordo moris, the ordering loves, that's supposed to make us love better things more than we love worse things, right? Shouldn't ever be an excuse not to love the person I'm actually near, because I actually don't have any trouble loving them too much. He says very few of us are in danger of loving our wives, our mothers-in-law, our annoying neighbors too much. And so, which is so often the excuse that we might give to something like this. It's the very excuse that the priest and the Levite gave to the person on the side of the road, right? Instead, as Augustine develops it, and he's talking about the role of providence in ordering our love, it's loving God so much that I choose to love the person I happen to be in his providence near right now, though they don't inherently deserve it as much as he does, right? It's 2 Corinthians 4. Again, it's not proclaiming ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for his sake.
Yes.
Loving God and all neighbors in relation to God, right? And so, man, I so appreciate that, and I appreciate talking about it with you. I know that there's a lot more we could talk about. What I want to do is leave time for people to ask you their question.
Yeah.
And so they've probably been putting a few of those in the chat. Friends, now is a great time. And if you're watching this after the fact, sorry, maybe you can just come study with Dr. Kurtz for that master's or PhD. But if you're on here now, please do in our chat, start sending questions now. And Andrew is going to start collating those and sending them to me to ask him. But as you're doing that, I want to ask kind of one final question for us, and that's just about resources. So I've kind of broken up into these categories. First, what would you recommend for those who are just starting out in theological study? They've really only maybe accidentally read things or only read very introductory things. 2, have read those things and kind of want to go deeper, are ready for that next step. Or 3, are actually considering this vocation. They think maybe that is for me, and I want to make sure that I'm equipped to do that, or I've really discerned whether or not that's something for me. So those 3 categories, kind of beginner, intermediate, expert, or however you want to put it.
Yeah, I love that. Happy to answer it. Just so I cover my basis, this isn't a Jesus juke. Obviously, I want to just make sure I say first and foremost the scriptures. Theology, one of the things that I think a lot of theologians can relate to this, where you read the scriptures a lot. And because you're so curious what the scriptures say, you get into theology. And some people will let that take them further and further up away from the text. But what you need to do as a good theologian is allow your theological contemplations to help you get back to the text, so that if a theology ever continues that upward movement away from the text, something has gone wrong. I didn't mean to quote him 3 times, but again, my favorite theologian, John Webster, once said, the highest form of theology is commenting on the scripture. That's the highest form of theology there is. And so that should come back. So are the text. So for all 3 of those, beginning, middle, and end, the biblical text itself should be the first and foremost. Now that I've Jesus juked everybody, let me answer the actual question.
First Galatians, then John, and then Revelation, right? Is that,
That's right.
those are your
That's
three
right,
answers? Yeah.
I mean, you probably need some Old Testament in there, but, what are you gonna do?
Hey, just kidding.
But that's right, yeah. You heard it here.
Song of Solomon is last, actually.
That's right.
That's the
For the real Bible readers, yes.
we'll have Jeff Metters on soon. Don't worry.
That's right, yeah. No, I think for the beginning, one of the things that's hard is there's so much out there. And I think you should really lean on your local church pastors. What stirs their affection? What allows them to love Jesus? And read some of those things. Read things that help you love the church. I'm a big fan of like the 9 Marks ministry, so read things from the 9 Marks guys. I think that's really good material to get into the local church at the beginning. I would read things, try to figure out early what stirs your affection. For me, I learned early, like many other Christians do, C.S. Lewis gets me. He just stirs my affection. And so I remember reading the Screw Tape Letters going, that makes so much sense of all of my inner life, And so read Lewis, read the greats. I read Knowing God early in college by J.I. Packer, and I thought probably chapter 8 or 9 of the book, I remember thinking, whoever J.I. Packer is, he worships a bigger God than I do, and I want his God.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are classics for a reason. Desiring God by John Piper, Knowing God by J.I. Packer. And then read, I think you should jump into some of those. And maybe this is that middle level. There's some Christian classics that are much older than those that I think everyone should eventually read. Things like Confessions by Augustine, or the Institutes by Calvin, or On the Bondage of the Will by Luther. I mean, these are all Proslogion and Monologion by Anselm. I read Proslogion by Anselm. That sounds really fancy. It's about 45 pages, and it's largely a prayer. I read that every January 1st because it reminds me of what affectionate theology sounds like. And so that would be like that middle category. And then for all of them, but especially the last is, I would say, and you've heard this before from a lot of other people, is find a dead mentor who they finished the race well.
Yep.
And that, when you read them, your affections are piqued, and read everything they've written. So just commit to reading everything. So I've done this with John Webster, obviously. I'm currently working with Augustine. I don't know if I would recommend him just on sheer
That's
amount
a lot
of
to
words.
read. It's going to take
sheer
a while.
amount of words. But like right now, in the mornings when I get to work, I'll read a psalm, and then I'll read Augustine's commentary on that psalm. And so it's like just reading the Psalms with maybe the greatest theologian the church has ever produced is not a bad way to spend your morning. So there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent, man. Well, that is encouraging me, and I think for some of us, the classics can be intimidating, and there are, of course, some modern translations. So I would just a quick note to people, and there's pros and cons to this. And maybe you disagree, but I'm generally going to say I'd much rather somebody mess up the Latin translation a little bit and get you into that author and really love it. And so one quick tip, if that's you and you're not sure, is the one that you see most on people's shelves may not be the most recent English translation of that. And there might be something that costs a few more bucks that is a more recent English translation of some of those classics. And there are many more being produced all the time. Puritans, of course. There's just lots and lots of even modern English, modernized English translations, but even some of those much, much older, like patristic essentials and those sorts of things. So I hope people will take up and read some of those. Many at this time of year, it's Christmas time, read Athanasius on the Incarnation. With, and if you're going to do it, read the preface by C.S. Lewis about why you should read all books. Yeah,
that quote you said earlier was from the preface of on the Incarnation.
Which one?
When he says sometimes
the bit of theology, you're right. It is in there.
Yeah,
it's so good. It's an encouraging, and it's really not that long a book. It's really worth reading.
Yeah.
Well,
this is like totally self-serving, but I do have a book coming out called Theology for Life.
Yeah.
A joy-filled introduction to Christian doctrine.
Yes.
It's coming out with Baker in the fall of 26. So it's submitted and turned in and everything, but it's literally for this purpose, trying to get people into theology. So
it's not self-serving to write a whole book. That's a lot of work. It's going to serve other people. So I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm glad you mentioned it. And I hope people will check it out. If they have not yet, one of the things we are giving away is another of your books called Fruitful Theology, which is kind of one of those first entries about very much what we're talking about. Why studying theology, thinking about God, ought to produce the fruit of the Spirit in us and how to do that well. And so I hope people will check that out as well.
In that book, there is an appendix in the back called "I'm New to Theology. Where should I start?"
Why are we even doing this? This is
Come
great.
on.
We should have just done a public reading of fruitful theology.
It has to be
Uh,
your voice, though. You have the best preaching voice, Travis, the
I'm
best
not
radio
I'm not
voice.
going to give up my voice to AI yet, but maybe
Come on.
after I die, if there's like certain stipulations and it can like, help my family,
That's right.
I'm certainly not accruing generational wealth as it is. So maybe if I do that. But I'm glad to be blessed in that one very particular way. So I'm seeing here on the chat that maybe we have not yet done our giveaway. So we will do that at the end if we haven't yet. But I'm going to be checking out some of these questions and trying my very best to get these to you so that you can answer some more of our friends' questions for our next 15 or so minutes here. And I'm excited to do that. So again, if that's you, if you're on here, then please jump on the chat and ask those questions. So I want to I'll take these in kind of a random order as I see them and think that they might be helpful. So Peyton asked a question, as we're studying theology with fellow believers, and we come up against some kind of disagreement. So I'm going to paraphrase you a little bit here, Peyton, but we come up against some kind of disagreement. And of course, there's a few ways that can go. We can have kind of open, charitable discussion about that, or we can kind of dig in and debate. How can we have meaningful conversations about theology with fellow believers when they might be stubborn? That's not Peyton's word, but my word is stubborn, wanting to debate, maybe pugnacious, if we want to use a Bible word. Ronni, general counsel. I'm sure you'd want to ask a lot of other questions, but general counsel.
Yeah. Yeah, this is where I think something like theological triage could help. And that's a whole side conversation of like, my tone is going to feel real different if we're talking about a denial of the Trinity versus a disagreement about like speaking in tongues or something. It's just I think wisdom would be match your tone and your heat to the level of triage we're talking about here. But in a more basic sense, I think one of the things that I love about theology is it has a way of forming you, even if you don't know it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know this, Travis, but I've spoke about this in chapel even this semester. But I wasn't like looking for a life verse. I wasn't like searching the Bible for one. But 2 Corinthians 3:18 happened to me. I didn't find it; it happened to me. And so that idea of like when we behold, we will be conformed is kind of what I'm after in the entire theological enterprise as a whole. And, I remember there's times where I was less or more open-minded with theology. And what I realized is there's like this pendulum that everyone has to go on, which is it starts here where it's, I don't know anything and I feel like an idiot. And then you start to learn some theology. And before you know it, you start to feel like I know everything.
Yeah.
And everyone else is an idiot.
Yep.
And if you stop there, it's like cage stage, everything, and everything's a fight, and it's the worst. Those kinds of people are the worst to be around. And then you keep learning theology, and you realize, oh wow, I know so little. And then you keep going, and you're like, I know what the Lord has allowed me to know. Hebrews 6:3 says, I will move on from elementary doctrines into maturity if He permits it, and I'm just going to beg Him to permit it for the rest of my life. And so that's like the bell curve we all have to go on, and you can't force people on the theological journey for yourself or for people you're ministering to. Theology, and more important, theological wisdom is not microwavable. And so if you're dealing with a stubborn, non-open-minded, kind of closed-minded person, just keep being gentle, keep being patient, keep giving them the beauty that is theology. And I think, as they get into the deeper waters, they'll be like, oh, wow, there's a lot out here. So at least that's my experience.
Yeah, no, that's it's helpful. It's encouraging. I think I'd add too, even thinking about the Trinity here, I'm going to even approach the way I correct someone's like language, so like policing language. I mean, you and I both know, man, that the specific terms we use when we talk about these doctrines actually are really important.
Yeah.
But I don't want to assume someone says, for instance, the three parts of the Trinity.
Yeah.
I don't want to like squelch any love that they have for talking about God, even as I want to gently correct them. So like, I'm sure you've come up against this even in classes occasionally. I will always make the note, hey, by the way, we don't use the term parts. Even members is a little dodgy. We want to use the term
Yeah.
persons. Here's why. But I don't want it to be like, you don't even know you're a heretic, you know?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And because what we can do is we can scare people away from ever wanting to say anything
Yes.
again, right? And I'm going to treat
Yes.
that very differently than someone who is teaching in a Sunday school class, or someone who's preaching a sermon, who's writing a book. That's going to be a very different sort of a situation than someone who's just casually talking about their Savior, the God that they love.
That's exactly right.
And that's hard to do.
One of the things I remind my students often is theological ignorance is very different than theological denial. And there's a huge difference between someone saying, I know what the Council of Nicaea said about the Trinity, and I hate it.
Yeah, right.
Versus, I believe in the Trinity. I don't know how to speak about it. It's way complex and over my head. Well, it's like the thief on the cross did not have his theological P's and Q's figured out. He didn't have his theological ducks in a row, and he seemed pretty fine, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
So there's a difference between denial and ignorance. And I have learned just from my own experience with students and with church members, there are times where you need the posture of, how dare you think or say that?
Mm-hmm.
However, that's rare.
Yeah.
More effective for me, in my experience, instead of like, how dare you, I'm a theological hammer, is come and see.
Yeah.
I have found beauty over here, and you have got to see it.
That's right.
That kind of posture is not theological gatekeeping, and it'll actually show people the beauty of what this is.
Yeah. No, that's I think a helpful way to think of it too, is we're not gatekeepers, we're ushers, you know. Let me get you to your seat, right? I love that. I love it a lot. So we continue to lots of questions we could ask, and some have asked here about like books you'd recommend, and I want to get to those if we have time. But a question comes in from Tristan, you know, saying I read that you love proper Trinitarianism. So I don't know where we're reading this, but I'm sure it could be several places. How does having a proper understanding of Trinitarianism help a Christian in their walk? So we're talking about the practicality of having your P's and your Q's lined up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the question of my life. That's why I'm kind of smiling. Like, this is what I'm giving my entire life to, whoever asked this question. So thanks for asking it. You know, in one way, the Trinity is one of the least practical doctrines. Meaning, like, if you're looking for like 10 ways to be a better person or get that promotion, the doctrine of the Trinity might not help you.
Unless you're a theologian.
And yet, that's right. Yeah, that's right. In other ways, it is the most practical doctrine in the Christian life, because everything, we are from him, through him, and we are going to him.
That's right.
And so it's one of those things where, you know, it's kind of a silly analogy, but like, try to imagine a book or a movie that you're watching or you're reading, and you're just like, I don't understand what's going on. When you just feel like you've lost the plot, and the book is not enjoyable, or the movie's not enjoyable. And if someone were to like give you the outline of the book from the beginning, you'd be like, okay, I kind of see, like, this is kind of I don't really know where we're going here in the wilderness, but I can kind of see where we're going. Once you have the kind of the map of the story, all of it kind of makes sense. Well, this might sound hokey, but the Trinity is the map of the cosmos. All of this comes from him, it's being sustained by him, and it will one day return to him, either for delight or for destruction. And when you have the doctrine of the Trinity a little more clear in your head, who the Trinity is, what the Trinity is doing, it's like you have the blueprint of the universe, such that you can know what is real in a way that's kind of profoundly hard to describe. And so in one way, the doctrine of the Trinity is not going to change your day-to-day life. In another way, it'll change every moment of your life as you recognize all of this, whatever this is, all of this is about the Trinity. All of this is from the Trinity, through the Trinity, to the Trinity. And in that way, it's the most practical doctrine in the world.
I love it. Romans 11:36. Do you read personal appropriations onto those three statements? Onto those three three prepositions?
Yeah.
It's like, I want to read something on this. Like, it comes to mind for me a lot, and I'm like,
yeah.
It doesn't immediately.
You mean, is it only Christological, or can you say the Trinity? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, should you appropriate the from,
yes,
the through, and the to Father, Son, and Spirit, right?
I
only
see.
Appropriating. You know, we're talking about, you know, we're just talking about
you.
Look
at you.
No, I'm serious. I want to read something on it, because it strikes me as like, I could see it, but I could also see you making a really bad theological move if you do that. So I've always been curious about it. I would encourage too. I've seen you recommend this book as well. If someone's trying to answer this question, I know there are books that get directly at how the life of the Trinity, for instance, is practical, helpful for the Christian life. One of those is Michael Reeves' Delighting in the Trinity. But one that's just going to just get at a little bit more of the doctrine of the Trinity that's pretty short is the Short Studies in Systematic Theology entry on this by Scott Swain. And I'd encourage that one if you're thinking, I've just never read a whole book about this. This is a short one that I think would be helpful and kind of help elaborate a little bit on what Ronnie's saying. Yeah, maybe there's another good one that you'd like to recommend.
Yeah, Scott Swain's is amazing. If you want to touch longer, The Triune God by Fred Sanders is wonderful.
Yeah, that's good. His Fount of Salvation is another of his that's similar.
Yeah, that's more on soteriology, but yes.
But he's connecting that back a little bit, right? Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
That's really good. Well, and these are great questions. I'm excited to do it. We are going to have our giveaways in just a minute, so I want to have time for, I think, just one more question. And as much as I would love to try to make you give a hot take and answer. One question was just best systematic theology. I'm going to not make you answer that one because we don't have time for all the caveats that you would want to give.
That's right.
Because I know you would want to do a few of this. But somebody asked us to go back to the beatific vision. So you didn't use those terms, but somebody picked up on that. You're talking, and you mentioned 2 Corinthians 3:18 multiple times here. What is the beatific vision? What role does that play as we think about theological contemplation?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, this is a great last question.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the beatific vision. The beatific vision is the hope of heaven. I mean, it's what makes heaven heaven. There's a lot to look forward to in heaven, right? The undoing of injustice, the death of pain, the death of death, the reunification of loved ones. All of that's great. It's so good. Like no more tears, no more pain. Great. But if I can have all of that and I don't get God, it's not heaven.
Yep.
And so the beatific vision is a doctrine long held by nearly every branch of Christian theology in some way or another that says the goal of heaven is to see God. Now, there's disagreements, of course, about what exactly it means to see God and what will we see. Will it be an intellectual vision? Will it be an ocular vision? That's fine. There's a lot of debate about what exactly the particulars of the beatific vision is. But most important, what the beatific vision teaches is that in the end, we get the ultimate reward of the Christian life, which is God himself. And that in the face of Jesus, we will see the triune God. And one day our faith will turn to sight, and that beholding will be an eschatological beholding, so that for all of my days, I will never comprehend, but I will ever apprehend the beauty and the glory of the Lord. A quick recommendation, one of my best friends in the world, Sam Parkinson, wrote a book called To Gaze Upon God that I would highly recommend on the beatific vision.
Excellent. Well, Ronnie, thanks so much for your time here, man. I appreciate, the way that you embody this, the way you're cultivating this among your students and for our global campus, and now here in this call. Thanks so much for being here.
Man, thank you. Thanks again for all you do. Thanks to all of the global campus students, those who are watching now and who will watch later. Appreciate you all.
Thanks for joining Local Theologians, a podcast from Midwestern Seminary's global campus. Learn more about online theological education at mbts.edu/global.